Well, this has been a long time coming, so I'm so delighted again to welcome Nilesh Nanavati, good friend of mine. Nilesh is an entrepreneur, an operator, a management consultant with nearly 30 years of experience in the financial services industry and financial services technology specifically. I know you're a strategic thinker with great execution skills. We've been partners for a while in the past. Businesses transform themselves through, digital and bring them into a modern day world. So listen, I'm going to put your entire bio in the show notes, Nilesh, and I know you're your father of one very bright son. We'll mention his name, Raghav, and your husband, Dr. Farzana. Welcome to the show, my friend Nilesh.
Thank you so much, Raju. It's nice to be here, and it's great to see what you've been doing yourself, and so bringing people to become more aware about themselves. That's a great thing. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for saying that. And I often ask the question. I'm going to Nilesh ask you the same question that I ask my guests. I want to know who Nilesh is rather than what Nilesh does.
Okay. I mean, obviously, that's a question that requires a whole lifetime for some people to figure out, and I think it's a great question. I've thought about that in my own journey of my own life, and I'd say that at this point in my life, who I am is, I've come to know that there are certain things that I really like. And as a result of that, that's who I am. So for instance, I like to create things. I like to build things. I like to fix things. I like to plan around things, organize things. And so if you ask me who I am, that's who I am. When I introspect and, think about myself, what I enjoy, that's really who I am, right? Someone who's intellectually curious, but then likes to take that next step into engaging in whatever activity there is to kind of drive it to a certain outcome. That outcome may not be completely the end of the goal. It may be partly leading to that goal, but nevertheless, it's to create. And that's where I really thrive. That's who I am.
That's awesome. So since we're beginning with a little bit of philosophy here, and you've had 30 years, you've spent a lot of time in established corporate, roles, and the transition to entrepreneurship. Before we get to that, I know you're pretty much raised, I know you're Indian origin, like me, but raised in the United States. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I came here when I was about 13 years of age. So just when I was starting to be a teenager.
Okay. So start going from corporate to the unpredictable world of entrepreneurship. How did you redefine your understanding of risk and success? I mean, what philosophical shifts did you have to make to embrace this new path fully? And you've been at it now for, I think, 15 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me, I define success in a different way, right? Probably not just in a monetary term. I tell my son, he asked me, Dad, what's the difference between wealth and being rich? And obviously, wealth has a broader definition. And I always felt that wealth is not just about, how much money you have, but it's also about whether you've truly learned from the life that's been given to you. And so, you asked me earlier who I am. I tried to take those things and put it into practice to bring satisfaction to myself. To me, that's the goal I'm trying to pursue. Now, in that process, you also asked about risks. So there's risk in everything, right? And so to me, risk is relative to the effort that you are making. And, if I tell you that, if I pursued a professional life with rather than being an entrepreneur, of course, there were certain risks there that I would have taken. In the path I've chosen to take, I've taken some risks as well. And I was more aware of the risks I was taking before getting into and choosing that path. Right. And so to me, risk is about not just failing. It's more about how you perceive your perception of that failure and how you learn from that. Right. And so I don't see myself as someone who's necessarily benchmarks to others. I'm actually, my family will tell you, I'm least, in a personality to when I set up to pursue a goal. And if you look at my own career, when I commit to something, every commitment I've made, it's been beyond at least 4 years. Right. And that means that you have to have the endurance, you have to have the distance to go at it. And that means you also deal with risks. And so you take into account those things. And there are risks that you're willing to live with, and then there's risks you're not willing to live with. And so that's how I kind of view it. I don't know if I addressed your question.
Well, our audience is full of corporate professionals who who look for inspiration from people like yourselves, who come here and talk about, the journey and or the turning points in their life that cause them to do that. So I think it's very helpful, I'm sure, for them to hear this is like, okay, it's, what is that risk that I'm taking when I quit my job, right? So that's really helpful for sure. And so none of this resilience that you talk about as a leader in the space that you're in, there is a lot of consciousness and awareness that comes with it, right? So this podcast or this show is called Bold Conscious Connections, and this season is about talking about bold entrepreneurial tales. So this is really a perfect way to have someone like you describe what they've been through. So how do you integrate consciousness into your leadership and your decision-making processes, not style, but process, especially when technology often outpaces regulatory, ethical guidelines, and all these other rules that are out there that try to contain and understand technology, right? So what principles guide you in ensuring that innovation that you're after for your clients does not compromise, your own standards of ethics? Let's call it that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for me, I have a very, how would I say, I spent a lot of time when I was younger, and I was lucky enough to have an upbringing where there was a deep sort of ingraining of philosophy, and I wouldn't call it, I would call it the Vedic philosophy. So there are certain principles that guide me, right? And I've always used that as my moral compass to engage in whatever activity I do, whether that's working with clients, whether that's working with my family, and that moral compass is fairly intact, and it has been intact. It has been tested, but it has been intact for a long time. And so I tend to use that as a way to guide what I'm doing, even with clients and even with technology. So one of the things in that moral compass, it says that there are always trade-offs, right? And in everything you do. So whether it's a path you choose, there's a trade-off. Whether it's a client advice that you do, you provide, there's a trade-off. And the biggest thing you can do, to be fair, is whether you're selling a technology, promoting a technology to a client, or whether you're advising a client on what they should do, is to make them aware of those trade-offs, right? That, if you choose X, here's the Y that you give up, right? And there are times, in my own experience, I've had situations where there are clients or there are counterparties that I deal with that refuse to accept those trade-offs. And that's where the challenge comes in, whether, you continue to try and get them over that hurdle, or you sometimes walk away from it because you just can't do anything about that, right? And you try and pursue another path. So that's how I tend to view, whatever decisions, whatever advice I render.
So in that context, are there practices that you have? I know you said Vedic philosophy of the Indian origin, like things that are incorporated part of your daily life that keep you centered and to the core of what you just said.
I mean, I actually do maybe about 5 to 7 minute daily prayer every morning, and I've done it ever since I was probably 10 years old, and that just, to me, that's an anchor, right? That's a moral anchor. It resets my compass. So if you imagine, every day this ship right here is all over the place like this, and then next morning comes up, boom, you get anchored again, and you say, what's important in life? This is what's important. What's my journey? This is what I'm doing. I need to go and do that. And then I recenter myself, and then I pursue that day as is.
Right. So that brings me to, talking about working with others as part of sustaining motivation, vision, leadership with people that you work with, keeping yourself and your team motivated towards that long-term goal of, let's say, OPCO, the one that you're co-running, especially under stress or the fear of failure. Could you share how you've cultivated resilience within your teams, for instance, and what practices have you found most effective in maintaining that collective focus and energy of the team?
Yeah, I mean, as an entrepreneur, and before OPCO, I've learned these things, just being an entrepreneur, is that you can't assume anything, right? You have to go and do it yourself, right? And most entrepreneurs I know, they don't wait, they just engage, right? And whether in hindsight the engagement was worth it, or whether they should have thought things through before, that's not really the point. The point is that they're driven by that energy, right? And so to me, the way I cultivate that type of a culture within OPCO is, and my business partner as well, is that we have it's not an official motto of OPCO, but we do have something where we call, get stuff done, right? And we have team members who are junior, who are, less experienced than us. And the best way for both of us is to show them how to do it is just by doing it. It's the only way you do it, right?
Mm.
Especially in an operation where you're trying to build things, right? And so when people see you do things, they will be inspired, hopefully, right? And to
Yep.
do things themselves. And certainly those who are intellectually curious, like most of us are, right, will want to engage in that activity because it is just a little bit of competitiveness and you
Yeah.
want to foster that to say, hey, I came up with a better solution, or, you were good at that, but I was better at that, right? So that's
Mhm.
one thing we do, right? The other thing we try to do when we cultivate at OPCO is myself, my business partner, we're both extremely self-aware. And when we started this journey together, we were friends. We had been friends for 15 years, but at the same time, we had never worked together. And so what we did was we said, you know what, let's try and build something together. Let's see how we work together. So within first 6 months, we knew exactly what our skill sets were and how complementary they were. And so as a
Right.
result of that, we are and we talked about it openly, and we said, you know what, I am good at this, you're good at this, and we're extremely self-aware about it. Now, as we added people to our team, not everyone was as self-aware, right? And
Sure.
not everyone is sometimes. And so self-awareness is a journey you have to take within, right? It's something that people can guide you a little bit with, but really you have to do the homework. You have to do the introspection, right? And say, what am I
Mhm.
good at? And
Yep.
so we try and encourage our staff to say, listen, think about what you're good at. Think about what you like, right? And maybe you're not good at X, maybe you're better at Y, and try and bring that into how we can be successful as a team, right? And then we align that with the goal, the business objective of
Right.
OPCO. So that's how we
Mhm.
bring the two together.
Well, that's awesome because ultimately, as many of our coaches have said it or mentors have said, you can really work on your strength because that's what you've been gifted, right? And you can strengthen those strengths. But to focus on a weakness, it's just a harder climb. There's so much ease in actually working on your strengths and getting really good at something that you're good at. So that's really very important. As I said, those in the audience looking to leave their corporate culture for entrepreneurship. Could you offer a strategic perspective on how to critically assess their viability for their business idea or what they're after, or what are the less obvious pitfalls that they should be concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm a student of life myself, so I don't
Mhm.
know, if I can offer a very comprehensive advice on that because I'm still learning, and one should always be learning. I still learn
Yep.
from my own son, but I will share some, what I would call probably my own experience, or summarizes my own experience,
Please.
and share some of
Yeah,
the
tell us a story.
attributes. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that I've been involved in three ventures. One of
Mhm.
them didn't pan out as I wanted, right? But I worked hard at it and built something that I was proud of. Second one worked out, and that evolved into the third one, which is up. And in each stage, I learned different things, right? So coming back to your question, first and foremost, if you were thinking about getting, going from a professional working environment to being an entrepreneur, leave aside the business idea or the things that you want to do for a second, right? There's a whole metric around that, whether that's a good idea or not, but we'll leave that aside. I think the one thing I would strongly suggest is see how you are, right? It's spend some time on the self-awareness, right? And understand, are you a doer? Are you a person that likes to engage in an activity, no matter what that activity is, right? And really drive it until you see an outcome, right? Or are you a person who likes to engage, but as part of a broader community, right?
Mhm.
And so those are two subtle differences, right? You could still be an entrepreneur, but part of a community, or you
Mhm.
can drive the initiative yourself, but the two are slightly different skill sets, right? And so
Mhm.
that's one thing to think about. Second thing to think about is thorns, right? If you think that there are no thorns in an entrepreneurial path, that's you're not being realistic in my view, right? Sometimes you know what those thorns are, but chances are, and 99%, you won't know what those thorns are. But don't look at those as thorns. Look at those as a way of growing as a person, right? I've had many thorns in my life. I've had to deal with very difficult people in my life. I didn't know how to do that. I had to deal with temperamental board meetings and, a lot of emotions that come out. And those are things that were new to me, but ultimately I learned to deal with them, right?
Yep.
And so to me, anyone who's embarking on that journey, putting aside your business idea or what you want to do, I think you should spend more time on introspecting, becoming self-aware of where you are good at, what your strengths are, right? And then either evaluating whether the initiative you're taking on can use those strengths and be successful just with those strengths, or do you need those strengths to be complemented by other strengths in order for your initiative or some other initiative to be successful?
So well said. It's like, it reminds me of a saying, like, your paths to the roses are the thorns, right? If you get worried about the thorns, you'll get off and never finish what you started out, was to make, the roses come out, in your garden, right? So it
That's right.
is, yeah. So we, the path is not necessarily, going to be full of wonderful, but beautiful skies and all the time, right? So yeah, that's for sure. The entrepreneurship journey is a very spiritual one. That's what I say. So, but yeah, that subtle difference is important to point out for those listening. So going to some practicality here, Nilesh, can you reflect on, in your career, including the businesses you've been in, an example of where a particularly challenging problem required not just, a new solution, let's say, but rethinking of the problem or reframing the problem itself? I mean, what was the situation? How did you approach it and, evolve through that experience? Like a little short story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, to me, I don't know if something comes to mind immediately, but I would tell you that when I was running a software business, right, we had a set of individuals that I was working with, and I was brought into that situation from an outsider's perspective, as an advisor. And these guys had created something really nice. They started off on a good footing. Ultimately, the dynamic between various individuals that were involved fell through, right? Or it had a fallout. And so I was brought in to kind of unite folks together. And I realized that there were some really tough personalities. And these guys had been on trading floors. So they're very strong mentality. They don't take no for an answer easily. Very vocal about and opinionated about how they feel. And I was amongst probably 3 people in that setting. And it took me a long time because I came from a different environment. I came from a consulting environment. So consulting is a little more, what's the word? It's more subtle. It's more the culture in consulting is a lot more polite, diplomatic, rather than very, in your face, vocal, and say it as is. And both have their merits, by the way. I'm not judging either of them, but both have their merits. So in this instance, though, what I had to do was I couldn't unite these guys on an ideological mission. What I had to do was to get them to unite on almost a business type of a mission, right? And so we had to kind of go in and say, listen, we're all bright individuals. We all disagree on certain things, but one thing we agree on is that this market is evolving, and we know that technology is going to change the way this world works. So how do we get most of the people we know to adopt more technology, right? And it kind of changed the compass a little, changed the direction of where we were going. And when we did that, it actually diffused a lot of the personality conflicts and get people to focus more around, hey, how do we beat the competition and how do we win clients, as opposed to trying to figure out whose idea is the brightest, right? And so it took a little bit of learning for me, as well as sort of a unification process for the people I was involved with, because they didn't know me. These guys had all worked together before. And so I was the new person. But I think that also partly helped because I was, in a certain degree, an objective voice. So I think that's one example I can give you.
No, that's great. So, people listening, this is part of the process, right? So let's take, for instance, where you are right now, and you don't have to talk about OPCO so much, but, the environments right now are pretty dynamic and unpredictable for the most part, right? So how do you prepare your company for unforeseen challenges, shifts in the market, and what does it mean to be future ready in your definition?
So first of all, the future readiness, right, is always revisited for us, meaning that, yes, we have a vision of where we want to go, but the current environment that we live in is so dynamic, right? It's always changing. And so the way we prepare is if you sort of think about our mission and our sort of goal at OPCO, when we started off, our intention was, let's try and bring whatever we know onto the marketplace. That marketplace includes both fintechs as well as, larger financial institutions. And that process happened. Now, in that process, people started coming to us and say, hey, since you know this world so well, can you help us do XYZ, right? And so it's almost like one action led to another consequence, which then led to further action. And so the way we have evolved our business is we started off with larger institutions, then smaller fintechs came to us, say, can you help us do XYZ? And now, as we look at where we're heading, right, we see ourselves as kind of the translator, the bridge between the innovative community and those that are the incumbents, right? And so we're trying to be the bridge between the two. And that's how we see ourselves.
Well, so that's all about future readiness, or even as an individual, right? People need to start thinking about where they're contributing and where they're innovating. That brings me to how, between professional and personal life, that we talk about balance and so on. How do you integrate your professional personal life in a way that enriches both of them? Because it isn't about separation, but rather integration, right? What have been your sort of key learnings about managing and integrating effectively?
So one of the I have to tell you, one of the things that I've learned in my life in terms of integration is, I became a better manager of people after I had a child, and the two kind of go in parallel, right? And that's the way I've thought about it, because ultimately, and it's not about you're dealing with children in both places. It's about you're dealing with professional. But if you think about that, you're when you're raising a child, you're thinking about not your own psychology. You're thinking about other person's psychology, right? And so it prepares you in a way to become a better listener, a better communicator, right? Learn to have patience, learn to, invest time in training someone,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
And so I see the two back and forth, right? So the way I integrate my sort of home life and my professional life is, going back to my sort of you asked me the first question, who am I? I like to create things. So when I am at home, I enjoy taking a bunch of ingredients together and making something out of it, right? In a concoction of a dish, right? And or I'm like, this time of the year, I'm doing gardening, right? And I'm always trying to sort of grow, trying to grow wisteria right now, and I'm actively at it, right? And so that same parallel I can draw into building our business at OPCO and say, okay, what are the key ingredients I need, right? And what is the outcome that we need to get to? So we continue to bring together the right mix of not just people, but right mix of ideas to say what works, what doesn't work, right? And have the same mentality that you've heard about before, which is fail fast. If you're going to fail fast, right? And then move on. Like, don't analyze to death, because that's the biggest trap, I would say, is we're all intellectuals. Most people here, are intellectuals. They are professionals. They're successful in their own endeavors. But when they get into entrepreneurial journey, they apply the same level of intellectualness. But unfortunately, entrepreneurship is not just about being intellectual, right? It's also about many other things, right? Being able to take a risk, being able to challenge yourself, put yourself in a zone that is not comfortable, and all those things come in and make a mix, right? And so same concept here for me is that when I try to put myself, when I'm at home, into an environment where I'm building something, same process when I'm at work, right? The communication at home with the family versus the communication with my colleagues and my partners, right? And those, I tried to keep both of those even keel, because ultimately, remember one thing, I talked about moral compass and anchoring. If I drift from that, then it's something I'm not comfortable with, right? So I use that as a way to manage both sides.
That's great. So, I have this saying that, successful entrepreneurs or successful people manage their energy, not their time. You're such a good example of that, Nilesh. So thank you for sharing that. All right. So one question before we switch to rapid fire. I hope you're open to rapid fire questions.
Sure.
So we touched earlier about what advice you would give, to aspiring entrepreneurs, in terms of being wedded to their idea or what have you, but who seek not just to start a business, but to create one that is deeply aligned with their personal truth and, of course, societal contribution, right? So what advice would you give them, given our uncharted waters that we're navigating these days?
The one thing I would say is just listen to your inner voice, right? And first find your inner voice, then listen to it. Listening to it comes fairly easy, but most people where they just can't listen to it is because they can't find the inner voice, or
Mm-hmm.
B, if the inner voice is there, they don't have a trained ear to listen to that inner voice, right? Your conscience will tell you, right? And I only learned that. I didn't go into being an entrepreneur and having known that. I actually learned that in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
that's the benefit that I share with others, is that if I'd done that exercise, I would have done this earlier, right? I would have just gone into it, because that's how I am.
Mm-hmm.
I go and do things myself. I don't assume things. If I need to, even if I have to do a very grunt type of task within our firm, I'll go and do it. It's just
Right.
because that's my nature, right? That's how I am, and I truly became one with my nature. And so, to me, that one advice is extremely important, because most first-time entrepreneurs, right, when they face that challenge, many of them give up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And either they give up or they realize that what they've taken on is a lot more than what they actually thought
Yep.
they were going to take on. And so, to me, that inner voice and connecting with the inner voice and training yourself to listen to the inner voice is the most important thing.
So well said. I mean, one of my mentors always says the only way out is in. So, all right.
That's
So
right.
let's switch to some quick rapid fire, and you can answer in one word or a short sentence. Number one: coffee or tea in the morning?
T.
One book that has profoundly influenced your life.
Vedanta treatise.
Ooh, I have it on my bookshelf right there. Essential trait for an entrepreneur.
Self-awareness.
Okay. An absolute no for an entrepreneur.
Ego.
Love it. Preferred way to relax.
Self-reflection.
All right. Last one. Your go-to activity for family time.
Cooking.
All right. We share that. Well, Nilesh, this has been such a pleasure and very long awaited, as you know. You've been hiding, not wanting to come up in front of the camera, so I appreciate you being here. And so I'm sure my audience will, listen to this probably several times before it really sinks in about all the things philosophically that we talk about, you talk about, and we share. So I don't take anything for granted. So before I let you go, one last question would be, in this, what might you have had, what discoveries might you have had in this conversation?
So, first of all, thank you for bringing out some of the reflections that I've thought about, but I never brought out, and broadcasted. So thank you for
Sure.
helping me do that, right? And I think that's an important point I wanted to make. But and I think your other question I forgot. Apologies for that.
No. What discoveries might you have had in this
Oh,
conversation?
yes. So, the discovery that I've had, right, is I've always had I've always thought about these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things that we talked about, right? Self-awareness, what attributes, in a subconscious way. I never consciously thought about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think it's befitting to the title of your podcast, right? And so it's bringing out what's within, right? And it is, you're helping people become more self-aware, which is an important mission, right? And so I think that's the nice piece that, to me, I learned about it myself. Like, it forced me to kind of bring these things out
Mm-hmm.
into the forefront. But without you, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So thank you.
Oh, I'm sure you do that all day, but you just, we're not in this public domain
You don't do
where
it.
you do
You
that.
don't do it. You don't do it consciously, though, right? You do it subconsciously, right? I tend not to. For example, I've never put it down on a piece of paper, but the minute you asked me, like, it just came to me, like, this is what it is,
Sure.
right? There's clarity of thought there. It's just that it's always sort of humming in the background. It's never in the forefront.
Well, I call this on my board here. It says 6 hidden senses for that reason. It's also in my book. I wrote about it. So, so those 6 senses are out there for people to tap into. You're already doing that, as you say. It's subconscious, it's unconscious. But consciousness is about bringing them to the awareness, your conscious awareness. And when you are verbalizing it, you're expressing it. That doesn't mean you're right or wrong. It just means that's where you are. And if something has to happen or change, it helps you find your voice and be able to, re-express in ways. Because this, who knows? This is going to be there for posterity, right? So who knows in what year somebody's going to listen to this conversation and maybe get something out of it. Even then, who knows? Because these are
Yes.
sort of eternal truths, right? So these are not. These don't change that much. So anyway, my goal here is with this podcast is really, I call it the unity consciousness as a subtitle, largely because we are as a human race and humanness, we're connected. We just don't know that, and so we find connections and we feel, oh, this person has something similar to that or different from me. And that's okay, because that's really still a connection, right? So I'm just hoping that people focus on their real why and the what, and let the how take care of itself. Because most of us don't start anything because we're so tyrannized by the how. Oh my God, if I want to lose 10 pounds, but if the thought of going to the gym, oh no. But no, if you focus on why that's important and that outweighs your perceived pain, you will move towards it. Otherwise, you will not, right? So entrepreneurship, starting something new is all about that, right? Because it's all fear first, rather than the fear of the how, instead of saying, I want to do this, my desire is burning inside of me, so I know why I want to do this, whatever your reasons are. Then you move with it. And then whether you find thorns along the way or other things along the way, that's the how. That's never going to be easy. And it may be easy for you. You get lucky, but generally it isn't. So if you worry about all that, and people have done these jobs, right? They've gotten to the jobs with, years of study, degrees, MBAs, etc. And then now you step into the world and it's still not straightforward, because you still connect with people. And it's problems with people, it's problems with bosses, whatever, right? But you still do it. It's the same thing in an entrepreneurship journey. Anyway, so I'm babbling here. So thanks again, Nilesh, for your time.
Thank
and
you.
look forward to seeing you again soon.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Thanks so
Okay.
much. Take care.
Take care, Raju.